From Golf Bravo 90. I can talk to people all over the world.
CQ, CQ, CQ. This is M6.
As a radio amateur, I'm legally entitled to transmit to 400 watts.
I use my local repeater, which is GB3DA.
The following interview with Pete from Essex Ham was broadcast on the 12th of July 2012 on The Scott Ross Show on Phoenix FM, an Essex-based community radio station.
This is Phoenix FM.
Sandy Shaw from about 1965 there. Always something there to remind me. And sitting right in front of me is Pete Sipple, who's reminding me that I've got to talk to him about some ham radio. So come on, let's turn our attention to ham radios. Now, I guess we all know that this entails having a transceiver or transmitter receiver, but you can't just go out and buy one and start operating it, can you?
You can't just go out and buy a radio and start transmitting. You do need to have a license, and you have to go through various training courses to get allowed to be on the air, basically.
So you've got to do an exam? You
do. It's very, very simple. In the olden days, it used to be, no, in all seriousness, it used to be a very complicated exam. These days, the licence is in 3 parts. There's a foundation, an intermediate and an advanced. 26 multiple choice questions and a few hours of training. So it's not particularly onerous these days.
Really? And you don't have to know Morse code?
Not anymore. No, it used to be a requirement. A lot of people still use Morse, but myself, I know no Morse. I don't use it, and it's no longer a requirement. It's a lot easier to get into than it used to be.
Now, you also, at one time, you had to build your own equipment, didn't you?
You have to learn how to build your own equipment to get to the advanced licence, which is now where I am. But no, you can just literally go to a shop. Something like that is, I'm holding up to the webcam there, a little radio, £25, you have to be licensed to use it, but no construction, no building necessary.
But you have to be able to build?
You have to know how to build safely if you're at the advanced level, but that doesn't mean you actually have to build. You can just go and buy something off the shelf.
Right, I was going to say, because these days, at one time it was all valves and things like that. Nowadays, you've got everything integrated circuit, so it might be a bit more difficult to do it anyway. And do you have to know all of the funny codes that there are? You know, XYL for wife and QTH home base?
You do indeed, yes, it is quite important, especially if you're communicating with people that don't speak English as the native language. So if you're doing a lot of work with other countries, then yes, you do need to be able to say back to you and this is where I live without having to be able to speak other languages. So yes, it's an important part of the hobby.
Is it expensive?
No, it's very cheap. You have to sit the exam. The exam fees are in the order of about £30. There's a local club in Chelmsford that does the training for a one-off fee of £50. That includes the room hire and the actual course itself and the book that you need to get through the exam. And by going on a course like that, within 5 or 6 weeks, for your £50, you've got your official government licence and you can start transmitting to the world.
But you still got to pass this exam, and it might, not everybody could they?
You'd be surprised. The course I was helping out with a couple of months ago, an 8-year-old lad called Ben passed and got his exam, and he's working away on the radio. So if an 8-year-old can do it, anyone can do it.
Yes. There's hope for me yet. What about the technology, the transmission modes and the bands used and that sort of thing? Because at one time it was all AM, and now it's SSB and USB and...
Oh, there's all sorts of things, absolutely. I mean, the common technology that's been used for years is HF, which is basically bouncing signals off the ionosphere to get round the world.
That's high frequency.
That's the high frequency stuff.
Yes.
You can use VHF and UHF, which gets you local. So those listeners out there that will be aware of CB radio, there are modes that are like CB where you can just transmit locally within sort of a 30-40 mile radius. And then there are all the digital modes where you can send text and images. One of the things I've been experimenting with is getting images from space. So there are orbiting amateur satellites, and you can pull pictures of the Earth from the atmosphere on a very, very cheap basic radio and look at these pictures being downloaded. So all very unusual and technological modes out there.
What about what sort of aerials do you have to have? Because, at one time you used to have these massive, any amateur, you'd see huge aerials, and if they were driving around the car, there'd be aerials all over the place as well. What about that?
Not so much of an issue these days. My XYL, Sarah, who's actually licensed herself, won't let me have any complicated large antennae in the garden. So I'm actually working from a 20-foot bit of wire nailed to the garden fence.
Perhaps you could convert her washing line.
I've considered it. I have considered it. But from just that short bit of wire, just tacked down the fence.
Really?
I can get into America, New Zealand, Australia, no problem at all.
Yes.
So you don't need too much.
And for that, of course, you're going to be using, as you say, the high-frequency bands. Do people still use the other bands, the top band and 80-metre and that sort of thing?
Absolutely, yes, indeed they do. I was using some of that yesterday. As you know, the Olympic torch is doing the rounds. Amateur radio is following the torch. And the station yesterday in Oxford was using that very mode to broadcast where the torch was. So, yes, it's still very active.
Why would anybody actually go in for this if they can just go and buy a CB radio? And CB radio, after all, goes out on frequencies that can go quite a distance, particularly, and you and I probably know this, and maybe some people wouldn't know, but when you get high sunspot activity, the signals bounce all over the place, which is why sometimes, that's TV is different, that's high pressure and weather systems, so it's slightly different. But
I'm very impressed, about that. That's good stuff, yeah, absolutely. The reason the hobby is so different from the likes of CB is that you can talk around the world. You are on a more professional level than CB. I'm always frustrated by the fact it's called amateur radio. Actually, given that you have an Ofcom licence and you have exams to pass, it's a bit more professional than that. But there's a lot to it. There is the technology behind it. There's building the equipment, if that's your thing, contesting, field events. One of the big things that we do is help the scouts getting communication badges and the like. And, of course, there's the emergency side of it. You don't need, if the mobile phone network were to go down, or
like
there's a
one of
power
them
cut,
just did,
like O2 has very recently done,
yes.
You can still operate amateur radio and use it for disaster efforts. It was used in Japan during the tsunami because it doesn't need the mobile phone infrastructure and landlines.
And what have you personally gained out of it?
Oh, I've done lots. I've done a lot of experimenting with the satellites, which is good. I recently did something fairly impressive to me. It may not be as impressive to everybody else, but this card that I'm holding here is an acknowledgement that I managed to get a signal to America and back using a very, very low-powered system.
Right.
So your average walkie-talkie,
yes.
I'm using about 4 or 5 times more power than a walkie-talkie, and I can do thousands of miles. So that is an achievement for me.
And that is called a QSL card.
It is indeed. Well done. There you go.
So, see, I've done my homework.
You've done your homework. I'm impressed.
Are you really?
And also, it's got me out and about doing things like broadcasting from lightships and lighthouses, which normally you wouldn't do.
Yes.
There's things like Windmills on the Air weekend, where you go and activate local windmills and do that kind of thing. So it's a social hobby as well as a technical hobby, and it is very, very good fun.
And you do something, I think they're called D-expeditions, which of course is to do with DX means distance, but you can go on these things and to Antarctica and places like that, presumably.
All over the place. A lot of the world's divided up into squares, and some of the activity is to activate squares that haven't been used for a long time. So, obscure islands in Scotland and the Falkland Islands and, as you say, the Antarctic. And a lot of people will want to work a very rare station that's come onto one of these D-expeditions because it is such a rare opportunity to talk to people in the world that you wouldn't normally get that opportunity to do.
Right. Somebody wants to get involved with this. How do they go about it?
A number of different ways. Certainly I would encourage people to attend the course up in Chelmsford. It's run by the Chelmsford Amateur Radio Society. There's also one in Loughton and Epping Forest that do a weekend course. But if anyone wants some more information, they can have a look at a local site which explains how to get a licence in Essex. And that web address is essexham.co.uk. Loads of good information there.
essexham.co.uk.
That's correct.
We will put all of this up on the show page. essexham.co.uk. Right, fine. Pete, thank you very much indeed. For the moment, we'll come back down to earth and take a look at what's happening in and around the roads locally.
Phoenix FM travel news with the hair company Crown Street.
For more on Phoenix FM, go to phoenixfm.com. For more on amateur radio in Essex, please go to www.essexham.co.uk. Essex Ham, spreading the word about amateur radio in Essex.